Chris Digby is a husband, a father, a former school teacher and coach, and now he's a lawyer who wants to be the next board member for the Dorchester District 2 School Board. I speak exclusively with Chris for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups, and if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Chris Digby, welcome to the award-winning Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with you.
I appreciate it. I understand, obviously, you are a real estate lawyer in Dorchester County. You grew up in Oakbrook around Summerville, and obviously you're a former coach and teacher. But now I understand you are running as a candidate for the Dorchester District 2 School Board. Tell me why Chris Digby. Yeah, and tell me why Chris Digby. Why now?
Well, you know, I've always been service oriented. It's always been part of my being. I've always kind of just gotten joy from serving other people, and so I started at a young age. My parents gave me opportunities to do something for people who had less than I did, and it meant a lot to me then. And it's just something that stayed on my heart all the way around. And so even through college, I went to Presbyterian College, where our motto was "Dum vivimus servimus," as we live, we serve. And so it was ingrained in us there as well. And then when I got out into the private world and started working in the private sector and the business world, I wasn't getting fulfillment from my 9 to 5, and so I decided to start doing some volunteer work in Children's Hospital and in Columbia there, and then was Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Columbia, and then actually moved back to the Charleston area because in 2004-ish, because I wanted to seek new ways of serving, and so I got a job working for a nonprofit organization where I was able to go and work with young people in schools, and then I got on coaching at Summerville High School, my alma mater, and I had a passion for working with young people and doing some of those things. I chose to go to law school because I thought that would allow me to pursue an occupation that would put me in a position of service to my clients and be able to maybe make some money someday. And so I thought that would be a good way to balance in those two ideas out. And so I went to law school. I didn't see an avenue of the law that appealed to me after I finished, and I didn't see opportunities that I thought would provide me the level of fulfillment from service that I desired for my job at that point. And so I became a teacher. I got a job working at Oakbrook Middle School. I taught 8th grade social studies at Oakbrook Middle School for a year, and I started coaching girls basketball and football at Summerville High School. I had previously volunteered with boys basketball, and in 2010 I jumped over to girls basketball, and then I also coached football. I was a JV head coach for a couple of years there, and then varsity assistant for many years also, and wore a lot of hats. Loved my teaching experience. When it was time to get out of teaching, I got married and was getting ready to start a family, and so I needed to make sure I was being responsible financially, and I had lots of student loan debt that had mounted up during my law school years that I wasn't really hammering away at or chiseling down during my teaching years because of my income limitations. But yeah, so when I got out into the private practice again, and I was back in the private world, I again was seeking opportunities to serve. So I stayed involved with athletics through boosters, and I helped raise money so that they would have resources for coaches and players to have all the things that they needed to achieve at their highest level. And I joined the Dorchester County Habitat for Humanity Board. My experience as a real estate attorney provided me some insight and some knowledge that's valuable to that organization because of their mission, because of our mission. And so we're involved in low-income housing and trying to help people who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford to buy a house and be property owners. And so that's a big deal to me, and I think it's really important that I serve in that way as well. And I just continue to try to find new ways to serve our community. I wanted to serve in a more meaningful way, and I think with my background in education and the experience that I have and the passion I have for education and for young people, I just thought it was the right fit for me, and so I decided to throw my name in the hat for a school board seat. There's 3 seats available, and I wanted to take a run at getting one of those seats and see if I could provide some value to the board and use my experience and my leadership and my desire to improve public education to the highest level that I'm able. I wanted to throw that into a position of service that would be meaningful and hopefully make a difference in our community.
And what's your value now?
So I didn't I didn't go to college to become a teacher. I got a psychology degree from Presbyterian College, and I was a business minor. So I took one education class, but that was it. I entered an alternative certification program when I became a teacher. And so I had several years of business experience in the private sector. I had several years of nonprofit experience for a private nonprofit that also used some government grant money to provide services. And so I saw kind of the inner workings of how that was. I have background and I have knowledge of the way other schools work outside of Dorchester too. And then I entered the classroom and actually spent time there kind of viewing teaching from a different perspective. I didn't have, again, the same education as far as teaching goes that a lot of my colleagues had in the classroom. And so I think it provided me a different kind of perspective and a little bit of different insight into the profession to begin with. And there were a lot of days I just kind of walk around and shake my head and say, man, why do we do it like this? This would never work in the business world. This would never fly. And so just a lot of different things. And I saw things again from a different lens. And as I was able to do that, and learn more about the teaching profession and the methodology and the pedagogy and the science behind teaching and some of those things, I just got a different kind of perspective on the why and the how when it comes to teaching. And so having that information and that knowledge and that experience, I think that makes me a very valuable asset. At the same time, I think you can get caught up in the nuance of education when you spend enough time in it. And that's all you do. It can be a singular focus for you and your vision becomes very narrow. I think you can get bogged down in the nuance. I think there's some, obviously there's plenty of other candidates with education experience that are running. But I think the difference for me is that I entered education with a different background. So I saw it different when I got into it. And after having only been out of it for a couple of years, it's still fresh. What happened in the classroom and the teaching experience I have is still fresh for me, and it's still part of who I am. My wife's a teacher, so I'm still very engaged with what's going on at the teacher level. I have many friends who are teachers and administrators in the district, and so I've got the ability to gain access and information, and I think that just makes me a really valuable person to have on the board. I've got, again, my legal background, my legal experience, my legal education. It provides me a different way of looking at things and analyzing risk. So again, I think just big picture wise, I think I check a lot of boxes of character traits and also knowledge that's necessary to do a good job as a board member.
You talk about obviously having access to some of your friends around Dorchester County. What is your relationship with the stakeholders in Dorchester County, particularly Dorchester District 2?
One of the things I think that people appreciated about me when I was teaching was that I wasn't always a yes person. I wanted to be a team player and I wanted to do that, but I also wasn't afraid to ask questions. So if I didn't think we were doing something for the right reason, or if I didn't think we were necessarily doing it the right way, I'd ask a question. I'd want to know why. And if I didn't get the response that made me feel like it was the right thing to do, then I'd ask that question. So I think I gained the respect of my colleagues in the district, and the friendships I built were partially of mutual respect because they know it matters to me. And I wasn't just kind of there to collect a paycheck. I wasn't just there because I wanted to play on the football field for a couple hours after school every day. I was there for the right reasons and it mattered to me. When it comes to the other stakeholders, also, I grew up here in Summerville. And so many of the parents of elementary and middle school students are people that I went to school with and grew up with. And I've had authentic relationships with them over the years, and they have a very, easy time being comfortable telling me that, what they have or what issues they might have. And so I have lots of different connections to lots of different stakeholders that are active in the school systems and school communities right now. I've also made time to meet with several of our local elected officials that serve our area. One of the things I wanted to do when I first decided to explore running was find out exactly what the formula is. What's the formula for being successful in a political campaign? And so I needed to talk with them and get their positions on some of the issues and find out where they stood so that I would know what kind of conversations would need to be had moving forward. And so I'm not going to name drop or tout specific relationships and when it comes to specific officials, but those conversations are being had. I don't have best friends that are that are in Congress or working on the presidential campaigns. I don't have any best friends that are leading the Republican Party or the Democratic Party in Columbia. But I've got relationships, at least acquaintance relationships and warm relationships with the elected officials that can actually have an impact on our county and that can actually advocate for us on the state level. And so I think part of our responsibility is to improve those relationships with all the stakeholders, people that have kids in schools, the kids that are in the schools, the teachers that work in the schools, the support staff, all the different people that make school systems work, and then also the elected officials who have a direct impact with the decisions that they're making, and maybe not a direct impact, but an indirect impact because of the way funding is controlled and because of the decisions that are made from a policy perspective.
What formula would you use on the school board to be successful?
On the school board to be successful, the formula I think starts with being a good listener, but also analyzing what you hear and being willing to disagree and have conversations. I think communication, a big part of communication is being a good listener. And so a lot of people think that communicating is all about talking. And I think you got to listen and you got to understand what people are saying before you can start talking back with them about things that make sense. And if we're going to disagree on something, we got to be good communicators about where we really stand so that we can, affect the change that we want to affect. And so I think it starts with being a good listener. I think it starts with finding common ground. I think every teacher and every administrator and every parent in our district and every student in our district, I don't think anybody wakes up and says, how can I make education bad today? I think everybody agrees that education is important. Everybody wants to do a good job with it. So I think the key is to make sure we keep our eye on the common ground, the common goal. And I think we just need to make sure we have policies in place and our leadership at the district level is being held accountable to make sure that every student is getting every opportunity they can to be successful and achieve at the highest level. So the formula for being a good board member is to be a good listener. It also means communicating effectively with the school community. And like I said just a couple of minutes ago, it also involves creating relationships with county council, state representatives, the people who are going to be involved in the conversations that lead to how much money our district is able to allocate towards education. We need to make sure that those relationships are strong. And so I think the formula is, again, being a good listener, communicating well with all your stakeholders, and then building relationships. And I think building relationships is not just with the elected officials, but also people in your community like parents, teachers, coaches, administrators, all the different moving parts within our school system, and support staff, huge.
What issues are you analyzing right now when it comes to Dorchester District 2?
A lot of, at this point, responding to a lot of questions and concerns of people. Again, because I talked about being a good listener, I think that's important. And so what I'm hearing the most now through emails and phone calls with potential voters is that they have concerns about specific items. And I think anybody that says that COVID and returning to school is not at the top of that list is not getting the same emails I'm getting. So it's been a hot topic of conversation. That a lot of people are unhappy with the decisions that the district made. Some people are happy with it. A lot of people are working through it, using the plan that the district is on right now, and they're able to make it work for them. And they don't have a lot to complain about, so they don't say anything, and they're just kind of keeping to themselves. And it's like anything else, we're going to hear the complaints of the people who aren't happy about it. We're not going to hear from the people who are having a good time with it. We've become very polarized. It's become a political issue for sure. And so I think COVID, again, is at the top of that list. So that's what I'm thinking about on a fairly regular basis, those conversations that I'm having with the stakeholders and different people involved. I'm asking for their input and their advice and their opinions on the best path forward and how we can get back to face-to-face education the way that we've been, practicing it and working on improving it and perfecting it for, 100 years. Obviously, if we can get back to that at some point, we need to do that and make that move. And so that's been a lot of those conversations have been related to that. The other thing I'm analyzing from a school board perspective is, again, I get back to scope. And so I've mentioned it a couple of times, scope of the board. The scope of the board at this point is to provide accountability for the leadership at the district level and not necessarily to get down into the operations. And so I'm trying to figure out exactly what that relationship is and what the group dynamic is and where the the boundaries for what's acceptable for our board members is right now versus what's being asked of a lot of us by the electorate. So a lot of people out there, are you going to fix this? Are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? A lot of those things and a lot of the items are operations items. And so we're at the point where the board's responsibility would be, if we feel strongly that an operations item that many parents are complaining about needs to be addressed, we would take that to the district level leadership and ask them to address it. And if they didn't propose a plan to address it the way that satisfies what the board feels is necessary, then we got to talk about next steps as far as holding them accountable and what those steps look like. So identifying the scope of what the actual role of the board is, and making sure that we're not making promises outside of that scope. The authority of the board as far as finances are concerned, that's a big topic as well. And so a lot of people say, you should just do this or you should just do that. Well, that'd be great if the school board had the authority to just do that thing that's being suggested, but it's never that easy. There's always a lot of moving parts, and there's always other people who have to be involved in that conversation, and especially when it comes to the financial parts. Just buying more buses or just hiring more teachers is difficult in a situation where we don't have the authority to make decisions based on the finances. We have to navigate that through our state and county level legislators and figure out the best way to move forward, so that we can try to do that. And there's some balancing act that they have to play because they're accountable to their constituents as well. So everybody's got a part to play. And so the analysis for me now is figuring out what the issues are at the school level that we can actually have an impact on as a board. Making sure we have a good plan and process in place for how to deal with our return to school. And then what we just talked about, making sure that we're finding that the ways that the best ways to navigate those relationships with our leaders at the government level that can actually impact some of those decisions that we hope to make at some point.
Now, you talk about the scope a lot through this particular interview. Do you know what the scope is?
Yeah, it's fairly narrow, and so I think again, I think when you boil it down, it turns into the ability to negotiate the contract of the superintendent, and if he retires, hire a new one, or if he starts making decisions that are egregious and not in the best interest of our young people, to replace him. And so I think that's a big piece of the scope. The other part that exists currently is policy for the entire district. And so a lot of the day-to-day operations are school-based, but there are policies that are in place for the whole district, and for the district level leadership, for administrative level leadership, for teachers, and for students. And so, you have your parent and student, you have your student handbook, and you have all those items, and those are things that go through the district level. And so, as an attorney, I've got some, background and education in how to write things in a way and analyze situations and policies to make sure we can have sound policies in place and consider all the what otherwise would be unintended consequences of policies. And so, so policy provisions that affect the whole district, and then accountability for leadership at the district level is that's the basic scope of the board at this time.
Let me ask you this, Chris. Obviously, you're a real estate lawyer. You're a Summerville resident. You're a former teacher and a coach. How transparent is the Dorchester District 2 system?
Sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And so it's easy to say to Monday morning quarterback everything and say, I wish I knew more about this, or why don't we know more about that? There might be scenarios where there isn't information for that. There might be privacy issues involved in that. Education is a hot topic. It's an important thing. It can be controversial. It's private to a lot of people. It's got a lot of private citizens involved. And we got to remember also that school action, school board and school district action is government action. Everybody has a right to privacy from the government. Everybody has a right to, different things. Government action is a thing that is limited by our Constitution. So we have to be mindful of those things. And so it's important to to understand, there are lots of moving parts to every decision that's made. Transparency in the world we live in now. If we give you an explanation based on a decision that's made, and I say I'm talking about the board right now, but I'm bad at pointing fingers at other people, so I'm putting myself in that category already. If we as leaders make decisions that put people in a bad situation, it's not always the easiest thing to come out and say why we did that, and to say that it's going to affect some people more than it's going to affect other people. For example, right now with COVID, not being able to go to school 5 days face-to-face is affecting single mothers that have 2 jobs a lot more than it's affecting some other parents. It's affecting parents that have 3 and 4 children at different ages, a lot different than it's affecting parents with a stay-at-home mom and 1 child who's a good student. It's probably working out just fine for some of those families. And so, again, transparency, I think, gets rid of some of the culture issues that I've talked about already. We like having a good school culture and people being comfortable and confident. Uncertainty is a big problem for comfort and confidence. When people are uncertain, I don't care what we're talking about. I don't care if we're talking about what you're eating for breakfast or a global pandemic. When there's uncertainty, people lack comfort and confidence. And I think those are 2 important traits to have inside a school building for the people inside a school building to have. And so when we don't have transparency about why decisions are made, it's hard to predict the next decision that's going to be made. It's hard to reconcile inconsistency and when people don't know why decisions are being made. So I think communication is a huge piece of being a good leader. And I think communicating why decisions are made is as important as the decisions that are being made in a lot of cases. It's uncomfortable. It's not always the best political move. It might get you a lot of ridicule from a certain sector of the community. And sometimes when that sector of the community is the loudest, it's going to create a bad perception. And I think sometimes we get a little bit caught up in fearing a bad perception.
Where is your confidence with the Dorchester District 2 system?
I'm glad you asked, because a lot of times we get in all these questions and it sounds like I just think we're the worst district in the world because I can see all these areas where we can make improvements and maybe be better about things. But I've got a lot of confidence. And I'll tell you why. We relegate this because of some of the need for political people to build up their own self-importance. But the fact of the matter is, if you take into account the school board members, there's only 7 of them. Our school is made up of 26,000 students ish. I don't know that exact number, but it's in that range. It's mid 20,000s, and there's parents and family members of those students who are involved in our school community. We got a ton of teachers in our school community and a ton of administrators, and I think the large majority of those people in all of those different areas are doing pretty well. There might be some struggles going on right now. Everybody's having a tough time dealing with COVID. Everybody. In different ways. But I think from a big picture perspective, I look at what we're doing here in Dorchester County. I see the types of families that we have, the types of young people that we have, the teachers that we have that care so much about what they're doing and are also, just great examples of professionalism and work ethic. And the administrators who are spending hours upon hours upon hours considering ideas and what we're going to do moving forward, and the great district staff that we have. I think from a big picture perspective, we're doing pretty good. Obviously, there's room for improvement. I don't agree with everything anybody's doing over there. Everybody's going to have a different idea, but I think everybody has the same common goal. Everybody wants things to be successful, and I think from a big picture perspective, we could be a lot worse.
From the big picture perspective, what should be the common ground now?
At this point, we need to provide the best possible education for each student that we can. That's going to look a lot different than it did 3 years ago. We need to look at each individual student's individual needs. Nobody can do that better than a parent. Parents are advocating for their young people, and they need to continue to do that at the school level. Schools need to be trying to work with parents to provide whatever we can to create the best possible opportunity for each of those students. And I think, again, this comes up fairly often. I think we need to start making preparations and plans to move back to a full 5-day face-to-face education, and we need to do that as quickly as we can in a responsible fashion with an eye on obviously the information that we have about the disease. I'm not an epidemiologist, so I'm not going to sit here and say we got this many more weeks of high results before we get back to a better result. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an epidemiologist. I work off of the information that's provided to us by the government entities and the scientists that do that on a day-to-day basis. But I think we need to have a plan in place as soon as possible to return, and whether we can implement that plan next week, the week after that, or the week after that, we need to be ready to go. And we need to have all hands on deck to have that plan in place.
Let me go to the Post and Courier article that was released earlier this week. An article goes to say this: starting on October 19th, obviously Monday, tomorrow, 4K to 5th grade DD2 students will attend school 5 days a week for only half of the day. The new 4K 5th grade model came after Superintendent Pye and his staff received pressure from the school board to try to come up with a strategy to get students back in school 5 days a week by mid-October. What strategy ideas are you hearing from the community, particularly parents?
Yeah, so there was a lot of parents who were unhappy with the students, especially the younger age students, only going into the school building. High school students that have spent a lot of time on their devices and are very savvy with video and with the new technology and the different ways of communicating electronically and virtually, it's a little bit easier for them, I think, to operate on some of those things. But for young students who haven't had as much access and as much experience with some of those devices and some of that technology, I think the idea of learning from that in those settings at home in front of a computer proved to be more difficult than what we'd hoped. And so I think that the pressure came because those young students need hand held. I don't want to say handheld. It sounds condescending, but they need somebody sitting in front of them that has the knowledge and the knows how to educate young people, right? And if you're a bank teller and that's your profession, you don't have the information that a second grade teacher learned throughout their time getting educated and earning their certificate. So having a parent at home that can help with that is valuable and it's important. But I think that the interaction with a teacher in person is important. And I think that was the conversation that was happening with a lot of our parents and a lot of our teachers. And so I think the teachers agreed that they were more effective if they could have their students with them in the classroom, even if it was for a shortened day. I think a lot of the parents agreed they needed to see their teacher every day to learn if they're going to learn at the highest level. And so I think it was our board's way of kind of putting some pressure on the district leadership, and the district leadership understanding and agreeing that maybe we do need to move in that direction and start making a plan to move in that direction towards getting kids back in school and see if this would have an impact on it. And so again, a lot of parents upset because it upset their schedule and it's not what they agreed to. It's not what they signed up for. It wasn't something that they planned for back in the summertime when the district told them what the new hybrid schedule is going to look like or what that was going to do. That the evolution of that has upset some parents and upset some families. Understandably, they had to make plans, especially if you have two working parents and all. So it's been complicated and it's been uncomfortable and it hasn't been pleasant for a lot of people. But I understand and agree with the common goal there of trying to provide the best education, and that means we can send some kids back every day for part of the day, but still keep social distancing and the guidelines that are passed down from the higher levels of government in place. If we can do that while the numbers are still questionable as to whether or not it's a good time to return to full regular face-to-face education, I think it was our district leadership's best attempt to try to meet the needs that the board was putting in front of them based on communication from parents all across the district.
I know you're not on the Dorchester District 2 school board yet, and you don't speak for the school district nor the school board. But let me ask you this: what ideally should parents be planning for now?
Well, hopefully they should be planning for their students to go back to school full time. I think that's the next step in the progression. I don't know. Again, like you said, I'm not on the board yet, so I'm not part of these conversations on a day-to-day basis where I know what ideas are being discussed. I don't know what is going on in the background as far as planning is concerned. So I don't know what to tell parents to expect next. I would like to think we are going to stick to the plan that was voted on and approved, that parents were kind of had the choice to select back in August or July, whenever that was. I can't remember. It's all kind of a jumble at this point. But as that was happening, parents were making decisions and making plans. And so I appreciate consistency. So whenever those plans evolve, I think it puts some parents in a tough situation. And so hopefully the future is continuing to stick with the plans that are in place now, with people becoming more and more comfortable with going back to school, so that we can go in there comfortable and confident. And then hopefully the numbers will continue to improve in a way that allows us to get back to full-time face-to-face as soon as possible.
Now, what part of the DD2 school plan with COVID is consistent right now in your mind?
What's consistent? The hybrid schedule that the middle school and high school is using, that's pretty close. I think it got tweaked a little bit from the original plan that came out whenever parents had to make the choice. I think the virtual piece has been consistent. I think the virtual academy piece has been consistent. My wife actually is doing virtual academy, so she's a PE teacher, but she's been doing the virtual academy, and so her students haven't had a lot of moving and changing around or changing in procedure or whatever. There's been a learning curve. Don't get me wrong. This is new, especially for something like PE, with this very active and in-person intensive. So it's been a little bit of a learning curve in that respect, right? But she, that's been pretty consistent. The virtual academy piece has been pretty consistent. I think the inconsistency came at the lower levels where there was enough of a uncertainty as to whether or not the original plan was the best thing for kids that we needed to try to think about maybe some different ideas to improve upon it. And so, squeaky wheel gets the grease. And so the parents that were really upset about the way that the hybrid was going and feeling like that it was causing mental health issues for their young people or ruining their ability to enjoy their school experience, and some of those things were starting to weigh on our leadership. And I think they were trying to do the best they could to provide some sort of reasonable, safe, I guess what's the word, like progressive move towards going back to regular schoolhouse face-to-face learning. So so while it's been inconsistent, I think it comes from a good place, but from a leadership perspective, man, it's hard. That's a hard thing to do. Once you vote on something, you make a decision. I tend to think you got to kind of ride it out and stand behind it and do the best you can with the decision that's made. Or if you're going to make a change, just make the change. Don't rip the Band-Aid off. If you're gonna piecemeal it together and piece together parts of an idea, I think that's a recipe to make a lot of people unhappy. So now at this point, you got people who are unhappy that they changed back, and there were people who were happy with the way it was. They're unhappy too. So I don't think there's a good answer. I think we're in a situation where we're having to choose the least bad answer. And that's something I've been saying fairly often as well. The good answer is to get kids back to school face to face like we've been doing it without anybody getting COVID, and we can't guarantee those things. So
now, what inconsistencies can be actually proved on right now?
At this point, I think the more we change and the more we try to keep adjusting or having the plan evolve any further, is what I've been trying to say. I think that just makes more inconsistency. So I think the inconsistency is just that it's not the same as what we said it was going to be back in August. And so that's inconsistent. But I think if we continue to make changes now, or if we revert back to that, I think we're still creating inconsistency and uncertainty rather than sticking to a plan and believing in a plan that we had in place. So there's arguments on either side of it, and they're reasonable arguments. There's arguments in favor of just kicking the whole plan aside and going and just figuring it out and dealing with potential COVID matters as they come up, but preparing as best we can to prevent it. There are great arguments in favor of sticking to the hybrid model that they agreed to at the very beginning and waiting for the numbers to bear out what they said we were going to wait for until that happens. So again, least bad decision is basically ultimately what we're working with here. What's the least bad decision? What's the decision that's going to help our young people the most. And what way can we help our young people the most? And that needs to be the focus. That needs to be the number one question that we ask regarding any decisions that are made. Is it what's best for our kids?
And let me turn to some data. Let me ask you this. What's the graduation rate at Ashley Ridge High School?
Ooh, I don't know the school breakdown. I don't know exactly the school breakdown. I know at Summerville, where I was teaching when I was there, we were in the 90% range, and we were working towards getting into single digits. I don't know based on schools. I think this district-wide, I think, matches that close to 90% number. If it's not, it's getting up there. But I don't know the specific breakdown for each school.
Well, let me ask you this. As we talked earlier about COVID, let me continue on that. How many students in DD2 still don't have broadband access from what your conversations with people in the community?
Well, there's been a lot of movement on that. There were some different things, some different programs available that were providing some hotspots. Some different service providers were providing some things. So that number started out being a lot higher than it is now. I don't even remember what that number was at the beginning, but I remember having that conversation with some of the people involved and wondering how big of an issue that still was, because providing them devices is great, but if they can't connect those devices to their teachers that need to be on the other end of it, that's a problem. And so I think they solved that problem for our virtual academy students that were going to be solely doing their work using those devices, but I'm not exactly sure what those numbers are either. I know at the Dorchester County Library, they have hotspots that you can actually check out that you just have to have a membership. There's no cost related to that. It's a great program. I'm involved in Leadership Dorchester through the local chamber, and we got some good information from one of my awesome colleagues in that program about what they're doing with that. So if you're watching this and you're still having an issue, contact your Dorchester County Library and find out what it's going to take to get one of those hotspots.
Should the state make internet a utility in your mind?
That's a good question. That gets way outside the scope of school board. It has implications for us for sure, because that's what led to this question, and we very organically got to that question through our conversation. And so there is definitely some impact on schools, and so I think it has some value. There are lots of legal implications to making a service a public utility and dealing with the private-public relationships. And getting the companies that provide that privately to do so in a public fashion or using public dollars. There are lots of legal implications behind the scenes when it comes to those decisions that are made. And quite frankly, I'm going to leave that up to the guys who get paid a lot of money to deal with those decisions.
Let me go back to
It'd be great if it did. It'd be great if we could. It'd be great if it was available for everybody in the whole world, and then everybody could just get on what they needed to. Don't get me wrong. It would be great if we could have it. But again, there's some difficulties in getting to that point that I'm not prepared to opine on at this point.
I know obviously you are a former teacher at Summerville High School, and I know data is not readily available right now. But before you left Summerville High School as a teacher, did you know the poverty index for the school for 2017-2018 semester?
I didn't. There's value in those numbers. I don't want to pretend like that's not important to know. But I looked at every kid in my room, man, and I looked in the eyes of the young people to try to figure out what they needed. I had a student that was technically on the books, legally homeless, thrive in his classroom, do a great job, dialed in, worked his tail off. And if you didn't have the conversation with him and know what his background was, you'd have no idea that was going on. I had other students that came from affluent families that lived in affluent neighborhoods, completely indifferent about their education and checked out. So the need for every student was different. And sometimes the students that I had, I didn't want to prejudge them because because the neighborhood they lived in, or the likelihood that they came from a family experiencing poverty. I was very intentional about, trying to be an equalizer. The students who needed extra, I want to give them more. The students who needed challenged, I want to challenge them. The students who needed to be left alone a little bit because they were a little bit uncomfortable or weary about how big I was and how loud I was and how aggressive I was about teaching government. I was probably more enthusiastic about teaching history and government than what they were used to. And so I try to be the equalizer. I try to give every student whatever they needed from me at that moment to create the most comfortable, competent situation for them in my classroom so that they could thrive. And so again, those are important numbers to know for lots of operational decisions and lots of things that happen in the background at the district level. That wasn't my role when I was a teacher. That will become more of an important role for me as I become a board member, assuming I'm able to be successful.
Well, let me ask you this, Mr. Chris. What's your proposal to close the achievement gap?
Man, that's another good question. That's come up a couple of times, and I think that's a long answer, man. That's a book. So achievement gap can explain a lot of things, and it can describe a lot of things. And so there are different parts in play when you start talking about the achievement gap. We can talk about socioeconomic status. We can talk about race. We can talk about gender. We can talk about all those different things, and each one has different data supporting different conclusions about the achievement gap. So when you have different data supporting different conclusions about the achievement gap, it's hard to address one without affecting the other when the solutions aren't the same. And so one thing that I saw, again, I saw reading comprehension as the number one barrier to my students' success. My students who had high proficiency in reading were able to do better on tests when they didn't always know the answer than my students who didn't read at as high a level. And so the context clues, the little things, the small nuances of information and knowledge that can be gained from having strong reading skills made a big difference in my students and their ability to communicate that. Writing assignments. Man, I could tell by some of my students, they knew the information. They just couldn't communicate it in writing. So I'm trying to think of new ways and provide new opportunities for different types of assessments. I spent a lot of time as a teacher doing that to try to find things that could work for everybody. And ultimately, it came down to some educational practices that seem a little bit archaic and too old school. But, ultimately, it was a struggle to find ways to help every student thrive. And because every student's achievement level was so grounded in their ability to read. And so I think a focus on improving reading at a younger age when we're teaching reading, improving reading comprehension is important. And I think it's going to have a big impact on our school. We've already done a great job of trying to address that. It needs to be more of a focus for as students get older. We did a writing assignment in my class almost every day. I'm not talking high level writing essays, but I throw a prompt up on the screen, controversial topic, something in the news. How does it relate to what we're talking about, Ryan? Give me 5 sentences about how you feel about when I was teaching law ed, for example. 5 sentences how you feel about the death penalty. 5 sentences how do you feel about, things that affected kids every day, school dress codes, right? Just little things, starting conversations to get into the nuance of the decision making and the legal parts of it, I guess, from a law education perspective. And so achievement gap, I think reading is the number one key to improving education for everybody. And as far as the achievement gap goes, it's hard to focus on one population to try to improve that when you're based on whatever demographic measure you're using and whatever demographic data you're using, again, without upending a program. So if we're going to focus on for example, the data, I've had several parents come to me with the data about the higher likelihood for young African-American men to have discipline issues and that translated into, again, criminal issues or legal issues as they get older. And I'm afraid if we develop programming strictly to address them, are we leaving out young Black girls who maybe have different needs? If we address things that are, again, meant to specifically address one certain population, it's hard to do that without thinking about the implications for other people. And so, and how is that affecting their achievement gap or their ability to succeed? So it's a difficult concept. There's a lot of moving parts. If we want to address singular issues, or we want to try to nail that down into a specific achievement gap, let's talk about those things. But achievement gap is something that gets brought up a lot, and I just think it's a complicated issue, and we could spend. I've already talked about it more than you wanted me to, probably.
Oh, no
without giving you a great answer. I didn't sort of give you a great answer. I totally lawyered you just now. I talked about all the sides of it without really giving you a great answer on it. So it's just a complicated matter. It's a complicated issue. I think the best way to do it is to look every kid in the eye and find out exactly what they need. And if you help all the kids improve, then all of a sudden you got less of an achievement gap in my mind. But that's not a popular answer, and it's hard to replicate that. And there's not a good, reliable, valid survey you can do to prove any of that stuff works.
And my last question to you, Mr. Chris, is this. What will the conversation be about the state of public education in the next 2 years in your mind?
It's going to have a big impact on what that conversation is going to be, what happens with COVID. And I hate to keep talking about it or bring it back to that. I'm ready to be done talking about it. But the way we respond to COVID, I think, is going to have a big impact on that, whether or not we can go back to school, whether or not a new pandemic hits or a new wave of it hits this time next year, and numbers spike and more people are dying, and it becomes even more dangerous to go back to school. That's still going to be the conversation. If it does die down, there's a lot of people out there who they're so caught up in the politics of it that they, once election's over, we'll stop hearing so much about COVID. I don't think that's true either, but it's public education has changed. COVID has changed the way we look at public education. There were companies out there providing full virtual education for students with where parents wanted an option besides public school, but maybe weren't interested or didn't have the ability to homeschool. Those companies existed back then. They've become even more important now. Schools that were providing some offerings through virtual platforms of education have had to go to offering full platforms. So, whereas at Summerville High School in the past, you could sign up and take a class through virtual school, or take 2 or 3 classes of virtual school, or do summer school to get an extra credit here or there. But now we've got students that are all virtual school. And so the virtual academy is a thing. I think that has value for us moving forward. I think it helps with some of the overcrowding issues. There are some students who are thriving in an all virtual setting. It takes a special and unique perspective and work ethic and commitment to do that. Some 15-year-olds have that, and some don't. Some aren't capable of doing that. So if we can work with those students to provide access to virtual education, we need to continue to do that. I think it's going to have a big impact on the way we handle some of our other programs as well. Homebound, home-based education can completely change. So students who are unable to attend school because of a medical issue or because of a behavioral issue or a discipline issue that makes them a danger to the other students at the schools. So they're not allowed to come into the building. They need education too. They need some education too. So in the past, we've had a system called homebound or home-based education that's provided them access to a teacher who communicates as their liaison between their other teachers and provides them work to do to try to keep them on track and on pace. I think virtual can completely change the way we look at that program or those programs. So it's got some value. The conversation, I think 2 years from now, it is very difficult to look, and I say that far ahead. It's going to be here before you know it. One thing about being a parent's taught me is how fast time can go. So I think 2 years from now is a wake up away. But our current status in society, our current situations politically are polarizing and they're volatile, and so I'm very curious to see what could happen over the next 2 years. It could go very well. It can get worse. We could have some improvements in some areas. I don't know what that's going to look like. I think the conversation needs to be open. I think it goes back to being good listeners, being good servants for your community. And I think if we do the right things and treat people the right way, that conversation will look a lot different, and we can stay focused on helping young people.
Chris Digby, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome to the award-winning Quintin's Close-Up.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.